Hey WoTV fans, this is Nashtaters, and welcome back to another episode of Friday Free Thinking. So this week I decided to change the format back to where I'm just making a video. Because a lot of the viewership felt like if we're there to watch the entire Friday Free Thinking stream, it simply is too long. And I agree. I think what I'm going to do perhaps in the future is I may actually start streaming on Twitch. Therefore, I can start cutting some of those clips to bring back onto YouTube. So essentially, it can make a more of an enjoyable experience for viewing. Now, today's episode of Friday Free Thinking, I want to touch on a subject that perhaps has been discussed multiple times already by me, and perhaps some people have touched on it. Now, I know the content creator community, there are folks who are actually involved heavily in the free-to-play aspect, and there are folks who are obviously involved in the spender's perspective. And there's no wrong perspectives because it's essentially how you want to approach the game. Just like all gacha games out there, you can actually do very well as a free-to-play player. And if you want to just kind of cut a bunch of the time that you need to spend on a gacha game, you simply just spend. So in today's episode, I actually want to take a look at just how big the gap really is of free-to-play players and spenders. Now, before I start comparing my free-to-play account versus my spender account, I want people to understand that when I first started playing this game, I did not actually want to play multiple accounts. Essentially, I wanted to get one of the guaranteed units in the game from the Final Fantasy Tactics banner. So I decided to make multiple accounts to see whichever account got the unit that I want, I would have kept that account. I never actually got involved in the reroll marathon because at that time, I just simply didn't have enough knowledge on which units to actually obtain. In hindsight, in today's marketing, maybe people recommend getting Ziza as your most focused unit. But that being said, with the recent addition of having everyone have the ability to get Ziza absolutely free, the reroll marathon perhaps is one that can change. Because of the fact that now, if you were to reroll today, there are going to be tons of units that are still in the database that you can try to go for rather than going back to the original legacy units, which are the first units that were introduced to the player base when the game was first released on global. So now that we got out the background story behind why I'm currently playing two accounts, let's start comparing my free-to-play account versus my spender account. Now, lately I have not been spending a whole lot because, well, I feel like there weren't enough things that were attracting me to open up my wallet. Maybe in the future I would do that, but currently I feel pretty satisfied with my spenders account. I have a lot of units that I've been wanting to have. I have them, and with the hopefully implementation of EX25 coming with the 1-year anniversary in global, essentially I have to make decisions, and by the way, a lot of decisions on which units I want to take to level 120. So here's how I'm looking at it. There is absolutely a gap between spenders and free-to-play. The biggest thing about gacha games is that the game tends to have walls in which you must defeat or destroy, or you could think of hills that you need to climb as a free-to-play player. And the biggest obstacle is, of course, time. One of the things you have to make sure you spend wisely is the given physical resources in a game as a free-to-play player. In this case, it's going to be your Visiors, or I like to call them gems, your gold, your energy, and ultimately any other sort of materials you need for crafting or your vision cards and things of that nature. But ultimately, everybody has the same amount of resources in terms of, well, what they own, which is their time. Of course, some people can allocate more time than others playing video games. But as a free-to-play player, essentially you have to rely more on your time as your main focus of resourcing versus spenders who actually simply buy more time by spending real-life cash. So that gap, in my honest opinion, may be one of the hardest things to overcome as a free-to-play player. However, that being said, the game currently is moving in a direction where they're becoming more and more generous to all players. Therefore, free-to-play players can actually take advantage to try to close that gap between free-to-playing and spending. Now, before people actually start criticizing why I'm making these type of videos, I by no means want to segregate free-to-play players versus spenders. It's just how things are in gacha games. Spenders definitely have the advantage when they spend. And I know I'm always been told you shouldn't actually try to separate the groups, but the reality of it is actually separated. Free-to-play players, generally speaking, cannot focus on trying to get all the limited time units when spenders essentially can just open up their wallet and get those units. And I know it used to be the actual terminology pay to win, but I think it makes more sense just to use the word spender, because given the fact that not everybody actually pays to win, because there's people who spend a few dollars a week, a few dollars a month, compared to people who spend perhaps thousands a month, right? And it's hard to differentiate that when you say pay to win, because even if you just spend a few dollars, you're not actually paying to win. You're just paying to one, maybe support the game, or you just really found some packs or units that you just really can't not pass up on. And therefore, it's much easier just to use the terminology of spenders. Now, one can actually go beyond that and say things like light spenders, heavy spenders, and you can even use terminologies like whales and krakens and poseidons. But I'll leave that up to individual and on their own interpretations for all of that. Now, when I'm looking at my free-to-play account, you can see versus my spenders account that there's some really big differences. The first thing you'll probably notice is that on my spenders account, there are a lot of premium units and a lot of limited time units. As you can see, I have quite a few here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, you can say that's 8, right? 8. I guess that's about it. Oh, 9 here. 10. And I think that's about it. So roughly 10 limited time units. And these limited time units, some of them, I got pretty lucky getting them. And of course, a couple of them, it took a little while to actually try to summon them, spending a lot of my actual visitors. And then of course, I have 2 premium units built in KOR Stern and Gilgamesh. And I think the biggest difference here is you can see that I have a lot more URs built. And even though I never like to talk in terms of gauging account's power simply because of UR units built, you want to kind of gauge your account on synergy. When I make groups, I generally speaking like to rely on the O formula, which essentially means I like to use tanks. So I got sort of a half tank here, a main tank here, a damager, a backup healer, and a main healer. And generally speaking, when I do brutal difficulty, that's what I rely on. But if you look at what I have, if I was to go ahead and switch Miranda out for, say, a backup healer, perhaps like Rosa or Ayaka, essentially I'm potentially going with all limited time units. On my free-to-play account, I simply do not have that luxury, because if you're to sit back and calculate in detail how many visitors a free-to-play player has gained over the course of the last 11 months, it will probably only amount to maybe building 1 to 5 limited time units if you're lucky enough. And then of course, the rest of the group are going to come from your normal database characters, right? What I mean by that is just characters that the game allows us to have access to at all times, in terms of you can farm for their shards and the heart nodes. Let's take a look at vision cards. And I think vision cards is what essentially can separate between the people who want to spend a lot of money versus the people who want to go the free-to-play route. As you can see, me as a sort of a light spender to a medium spender, I don't have actually too many vision cards maxed out. Technically speaking, the amount of money I spent, I probably should have somewhere between 10 to maybe even 15 vision cards maxed. But I choose not to go that route. And lately, like I said, I've been actually nerfing my own spending. Therefore, I really don't want to focus on too many cards to build, simply because I feel very comfortable where I am today in terms of competitiveness. Just because you have a lot of things maxed, it doesn't mean you're actually taking full potential of them. And I will get into that shortly and what I mean by that. As you can see, I'm just lightly scrolling through everything I have. Now equipment, I'm really not going to bother a whole lot because a lot of times I simply just have a lot more TMRs, right, or Trust Masters, simply because I have a lot more UR units built on my main account. And personally, I'm not really a huge fan of PvP, so I don't really get involved in class match, and I really don't enjoy playing arena all that much. In Guild Wars, I do it because, well, I do enjoy guild and the idea of conjugating with your fellow guild members. When you're taking a look at an account and you're looking at the power level, the biggest thing is you want to make sure you have strong vision cards. You may only have, say, 1 to 10 UR builds, given the estimate of roughly 1 UR unit per month as a free-to-play player. You want to essentially spend the rest of your resources building on your vision cards, because vision cards offer a humongous stat boost and powerful abilities such as decreasing damage from opposing attacks and of course increasing your own damage. So that is very important as a free-to-play player, to concentrate on vision cards. Just as the same, obviously, if you're a spender, difference here, obviously, the spender is going to probably have more access to powerful vision cards. Now, Esper is very, very important in this game. And remember I said just a few minutes ago that you want to make sure you're concentrating on maximizing your items. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure you actually work on resonance. Resonance, as I mentioned before in a previous video, if you haven't done so, go ahead and check it out. You can see I'm going to put it up in the right corner there. Resonance essentially means there's a 10 levels. When you reach level 10, you're going to get the full stat of that specific esper. If you're only at level 6, you're only going to get 60% of these numbers. So therefore, it's crucial that you maximize resonances on the characters that you use the most, and go through your espers to make sure that you have a wide diversity of different espers, allowing you to have different resistances, different attacks, different defensive stats, or whatever, to make sure that your units are flexible enough to deal with the many encounters in this game. Now that we cover so much, I really want to talk about finally the gap between free-to-play versus spenders. And that gap is actually closing a lot. When the game was first introduced, the gap was huge because, well, there were some really powerful units that most likely the spenders had access to, such as the Final Fantasy Tactics units or the Shadowbringers Final Fantasy XIV units. And I'm going to tell you why. Because when we're talking about PvP, which a lot of people like to focus on, you only actually need 3 units. So there have been many occasions where me as a medium spender have lost to free-to-play players. But because the fact that you only have 3 units to concentrate on, you can actually concentrate heavily on building your resonances of the espers you're utilizing at the time. You can concentrate on working on 3 powerful vision cards that you own, and of course ultimately make sure you have all your efficiencies, proficiencies, or anything that needs to be maxed on your units. One thing I mentioned many times is just because you own a very powerful unit, it's the same if another opponent owns the same powerful unit. The only difference comes when you're looking at their equipment, espers, and vision cards, or I like to call it the Trinity or the trifecta. So when you're comparing teams versus teams in PvP play, the biggest difference obviously comes from those 3 aspects. So therefore, it's important as a free-to-play, you really hone in and build units that you love to play with. And when you love to play with units, you're most likely to spend more time, energy, and resource to make those units stronger. And remember I talked about formations where I use tanks, healers, backup healers, a damager, or maybe 2 damagers? That's the go-to formula for me personally to conquer all brutal difficulties. And I think the biggest difference in terms of ease of conquering brutal difficulties in this game ultimately boils down to the skill sets of those units that you choose to utilize. If you decide to use Mont as your main tank, you can still beat a majority of the brutal difficulties with ease. The only thing I can say is concentrate on units that you really enjoy playing. Don't think too much about building too many units. And I think that's the key emphasis to being successful as a free-to-play player in this game. Do I regret spending money to get some of the units that I have? Sometimes, yes, because I'm finding out more and more that I don't actually use all the units that I build. A lot of times, they're so niche encounters that you may rely on those units, but ultimately you can still defeat many of the content without having to think too much about it. Ultimately, the min and maxing of this game is what ultimately drives people to spend. Min-maxing is what made people feel good. In certain PvE content and certain PvP content, there's always going to be a situation where the super heavy spenders are going to be in the top. And that's simply because they do own every unit, they do own almost every vision card, they do own all the powerful espers and the equipment and things like that. So therefore, they can actually deal and do really well with those niche encounters. What I mean by niche encounters, raids, limited time raids, right? Those are the ones where units get more bonuses if you own them. And I think that's where the free-to-play players will fall short, simply because they will not have the ability to own everything in the game. And for me, that's okay. I can tell you this with confidence because I actually play from both perspectives every single day. So at the end of the day, just make sure you understand that no matter what perspective you choose, it's perfectly fine. Don't be envious of people who spend money and they have all these luxury units, luxury vision cards and equipment and things like that. There's quite possible to defeat every content in this game as a free-to-play player. Don't worry so much about what others do. Only worry about what you do, because at the end of the day, you're in total control of what your actions are, and you're in total control of your own happiness. Until next time, take care of yourself and all your loved ones. Nashtaters out here. Take care.